Hello and welcome. My name is Keith Fair, and I'm the pastor for Faith Formation and Discipleship at St. Matthew Lutheran Church in York, Pennsylvania. We are part of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and this is the first in a 5-part series for the season of Lent. Lent is a very special time for many Christians of many different backgrounds, a time in the weeks leading up to Easter to reflect a little bit more deeply on who God is, who God truly is, and who we truly are as God's people. And that's what this series is meant to be, a time for us to listen and learn and grow together. I've selected a film series for us to watch during this season with a different short video each week. The series is called In This Together, 5 films on loving our way forward. Now, this series is not specifically about the pandemic, even though the title might lead you to think that it is. It's actually about 6 years old at this point. And that's an intentional choice, as I think, quite honestly, we could all use a bit of a break from talking about COVID for a little while. But I do believe that this series is relevant to our time of COVID, especially as we are hopefully turning a corner in the pandemic. I think that this series will help us as a church community and as people of faith to begin thinking about how we are engaging or maybe re-engaging the people around us, the world around us. As the videos discuss how people who live side by side on planet Earth can come together for the healing of the whole world. And I'm grateful during this series to not present as an expert of any kind, but as a student, same as you. I wish that I had a way to hear your thoughts and feedback about these videos, and maybe technology will give us that gift sometime soon. But for now, I'm content to know that you are out there, perhaps asking some of the same questions that I am. So let's get started. The first video that we're going to watch is actually the longest in the series. It's about 13 minutes. And in it, Pastor Brian McLaren, an American pastor and writer and speaker, discusses some of the ways that the Christian church has struggled in its relationships with people of other faiths, and presents some thoughtful commentary on more healthy, more humane, and more hospitable ways of being. Let's watch.
When the subject of interreligious friendship and collaboration comes up, people almost always say, well, we've got these big differences. And then other people respond by saying, oh no, all religions are the same. I think the truth is we are very, very different. Our biggest problem, though, isn't our differences. Our biggest problem is that we build identity, whatever our religion, we build identity by enforcing hostility toward the other. In other words, I learn who I am by learning who I'm against. I learn who I am by learning who's against me. And so when your identity is oppositional, when your identity is based in your fear of the other, then it doesn't matter whether you put a label of Christian, Muslim, Buddhist on that, you have an inherently hostile identity. My question is, can we find a way of holding Christian identity that sends us toward the other with love and hospitality rather than with fear and hostility? I don't think we're going to make any progress in this problem of religious hostility until we come to terms with our history. We have to face the ways that what we call Christianity is actually a fusion between something from Christ and a whole lot from the Roman Empire. We've picked up a lot of prejudices and biases and values from the cultures that we have inhabited as Christians. Jesus was crucified on a Roman cross. You would think that would make his followers be sensitive to how the Romans used crosses to get rid of their opposition. But within 350 years of the time of Christ, the Christian church was using the sign of the cross as a sign of intimidation and a sign of conquest. So we often speak of the conversion of the emperor of Rome, when maybe what we should talk about a little bit more is the conversion of the Christian faith by the emperor of Rome. That fusion of Christian faith and imperial power has had a long-lasting legacy, and we've got to come to terms with it. We know about the Crusades. A lot of us don't really know about a lot of other examples of our hostility. For example, what happened to the native peoples of the Americas, the conquest of those peoples, the fusion of Christian faith and colonialism. When we face that history, it will cause us to ask some deep questions about our own identity. We need to ask why, in the name of Christ, we did horribly un-Christ-like things. We did anti-Christ things in the name of Christ. How we could do that, we better come to terms with that. One of my great fears is that our worst atrocities could still be ahead of us. We can learn about our complicity in anti-Semitism over hundreds and hundreds of years, culminating in the Holocaust. We can learn about our callous attitude toward indigenous peoples. We can start to learn about some of these terrible atrocities of our past. If we don't learn about them, people thousands of years from now could be talking about how Christians in the 21st century supported nuclear war, supported environmental destruction, supported things that will result in the worst catastrophes ever. I wish that all of our problems were historical, but I think a lot of our problems are doctrinal too. I'm not an advocate of throwing out our doctrines, but I am an advocate of facing the ways that our doctrines have been used as hostile weapons. And that will require us to reformulate our doctrines. But in doctrine after doctrine, when I faced how a central idea of Christian faith has been used in a hostile way toward others, and I went back and re-examined that doctrine in a different light, I realized that in every case, those doctrines could become tools of healing rather than weapons of hostility. Let me just give 3 examples. First, the doctrine of creation. We often use that doctrine to get into a fight with people of science. So it becomes a tool of a weapon of hostility. But the truth is, the doctrine of creation tells us that we all have the same source. Every human being, ultimately we come from God. And not only human beings, but all living creatures and all of creation. We all come from the same source, which means that we're all related to one another. The doctrine of creation could become a powerful tool for us to rediscover our connectedness. The same with the doctrine of original sin. I think it's one of the doctrines that's been the greatest weapon of hostility, because it says that God hates everybody except the few who are redeemed and saved. But if we were to understand original sin as the desire to play God, in other words, the desire to say, here are the good guys, here are the bad guys, if that's what original sin is, then once we face that, we realize that's the source of our hostility. And so redefining original sin, I think, has powerful implications for us learning to approach one another in a different way. And the third example would be the example of election or calling or choosing. Many of us were raised with an idea that God chose us and that makes us elite or special or superior. The truth is, though, I think the doctrine of election means being chosen for service and suffering, to be chosen to bring blessing to the other, not to exert supremacy over the other. So those are just 3 examples, and there are many more, of how the same doctrine that's been used as a weapon can be turned into a bridge and into a tool for healing. Today, I think about the way that Christians often use the idea of chosenness to make it sound like God cares about Israeli Jews but doesn't care about Palestinians. Now, some of this is flowing from our history. We're recognizing our guilt in anti-Semitism that culminated in the Holocaust. So we're trying to, in some ways, atone for our guilt by making sure we're good to the people of Israel. But in so doing, we end up creating another atrocity in the horrible treatment that the Palestinian Christians and Muslims are experiencing in the land of Israel today. Another example would be the idea that the only legitimate thing for a committed Christian to do to a member of another religion is to try to convert him. That there's no value in neighborliness if it isn't just used as a connection for attempted conversion. My gosh, my friends who are Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist or atheist, they tell me that one of the worst things that can happen is to have a Christian as your neighbor, because they'll just never be a friend to you, they'll never enjoy you, they'll always have some little edge. It's like, having some friend who's into network marketing and always wants to get you into their downline. So there's enormous possibilities for undoing some of the damage we've done by revisiting our understandings of key biblical terms. I think we have rethinking to do in terms of our history, in terms of our doctrine. I also think we have rethinking to do in terms of our liturgy. For example, baptism is a core Christian practice, but the way it's practiced by a lot of people, I think, reinforces an idea that we're clean and everybody else is dirty. And baptism becomes the reenactment and the reinforcement of our identity as clean and everybody else as dirty. When we practice baptism that way, we're practicing it more the way it was practiced in the temple by the chief priests and all of the temple staff. We don't realize that when John the Baptist left the temple priesthood and went out and baptized people in the Jordan River, he was engaging in a kind of act of guerrilla theater. He was overturning that old understanding of baptism. Same thing we could say with the celebration of the Eucharist, another liturgical act that for a lot of people is a weekly reminder that God is going to send everybody to hell except for the few people who are invited to the table. I think we need to rediscover the Eucharist as, no, this is the message that God has sat down at the table and is inviting everybody into fellowship and reconciliation. So our liturgical practices can either reinforce an identity of hostility, or they can build in us a deeper sense of solidarity and hospitality. So I think we have a doctrinal challenge, I think we have a historical challenge, I think we have a liturgical challenge, and I also think we have a missional challenge. The problems that face us as a civilization, as a planet, are too big for Christians to solve alone, or for Muslims to solve alone, or for Hindus to solve alone. We're at this point where if we're going to face the problems that threaten our future, we're going to have to learn to be collaborators with people of other faiths. We're going to have to reach into our faith and find resources that we bring to the table and invite others to the table to work together for the common good. That's going to require us to rethink our whole doctrine of God's presence in the world, of the work of the Holy Spirit in the world. I think we'd agree that wherever parents love children, wherever spouses love each other, wherever friends are good to each other, wherever people care for the elderly or the vulnerable or the poor, wherever that happens, God is pleased. We might even say wherever that happens, the Holy Spirit is in some real way at work. And the question is, can we now come together in even bigger ways as Christians working together with Muslims and Jews and Hindus and Buddhists and atheists, and allow ourselves to see how the Holy Spirit can work through us together for the common good of all. A couple of years ago, I was invited to be part of a gathering of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. And there was a Muslim speaker who was just brilliant. And I had a lot of questions about Islam. And I approached her afterwards, and she just gave me fantastic answers. And we exchanged email addresses. And I don't know, it was a month or two later, I got an email from this woman. She said, "I'd never heard of you. After meeting you, I Googled your name. And I Googled your name with the word Mohammed, and I Googled your name with the word Islam and Muslim. So I found out every place on the internet where you have ever spoken about Muslims or Islam." She said, every single instance I found, you spoke of us with respect and you spoke of us trying to build bridges, and you spoke of us as fellow human beings. She said, I also found on the internet what other Christians said about you because you speak kindly about us. And she said, I really want to thank you. She said, I know there's a cost for being a peacemaker. And there were two last sentences she said that are two of the most meaningful things anyone's ever said to me. First, she said, I think you're saving Muslim lives. And second, she said, you are a true Christian. And at that moment, I think I got a deeper understanding into what the word Christian means. And I hope that's something all of us can rediscover.
Can we find a way of holding Christian identity that sends us toward the other with love and hospitality rather than fear and hostility? That's a powerful quote. Take a few minutes of quiet time here. Allow yourself to remember your own Christian faith journey. Take time to remember the faces of those who have come and gone. Feel their embraces. Recall moments of awakening. What is it that has primarily shaped your faith identity? Do you find any acts of hostility on your path? Any of those us, not them exclusions? Lastly, what about acts of radical love and welcome? And for me, I think about the church that I was part of in college, the pastor, the choir director, the friends that I met there, some that were my age, some that were younger, some that were older, and the ways that they shaped who I was during that critical time in my life. You know, I reflect on interreligious workers like Pastor McLaren, people like Thomas Merton, like Thich Nhat Hanh, like Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi once said, Gandhi being Hindu, once said, I am also a Muslim, a Christian, a Buddhist, and a Jew. Here are just a couple of questions for you to reflect on. You can pause the video here or come back to this place and watch again. The first one is, what is your next step towards cultivating love and hospitality in your life and in your community? And the second is, how do we promote respect, build bridges, and extend dignity, all while knowing there is a cost to being a peacemaker? Lastly, I want to leave you with a passage from Paul's letter to the Ephesians. And I want to acknowledge that it's really hard to not read the Bible without seeing it through a specifically Christian lens, especially an exclusively Christian lens. But I'd like us to hear these words from Paul in a way that is open to welcome and accept people of all faiths, recognizing that we too are sometimes the outsiders in need of God's grace and God's love. So this is Ephesians chapter 3, verses 14 through 19. Paul writes, for this reason, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth takes its name. I pray that according to the riches of his glory, that he may grant that you may be strengthened in your inner being with power through his Spirit, and that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith as you are being rooted and grounded in love. I pray that you may have the power to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, so that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Blessed Lent to us all. See you next week.